The Albanese government has come out and said that they're going to put a ban on non-compete clauses which will apply from 2027, and this ban will operate retrospectively, meaning that even if you've signed and entered a contract prior to the ban taking effect, it will still apply.
Yeah, so this reform was announced in the 2025-2026 budget by the Albanese government, and what that reform is saying is it will ban all non-compete clauses for employees underneath the high income threshold under the Fair Work Act, which is currently at $183,000, which changes every July. And the reason for this reform by the Albanese government is that a Treasury research found that 3 million Australian employees are currently subject to a non-compete clause.
And we're not talking about our senior executives here that are privy to genuine trade secrets. We're talking about our hairdressers, our childcare workers, construction workers. And if you look at it, about 1 in 5 Australians are subject to these non-competes. And about half the workforce has some kind of restraint of trade or restraint clause in their contract.
And there's a specific concern about something called a chilling effect, which is when an employee is subject to that non-compete clause, and an employer will send a legal letter seeking legal action, which will deter that employee from taking that work when that unenforceable non-compete clause wouldn't have held up to scrutiny in a court.
And that's exactly the problem that this reform is targeting. So it's looking at, okay, well, the mere presence of these clauses, these non-competes, these restraints are holding employees back from making a jump and moving elsewhere. And because of that, it's causing wages to be below what they otherwise would be. And the reform is trying to not only be one of a productivity reform, but also one that protects workers. And the way that it's modelled should set up a framework so that employees kind of can go off as they like.
Yeah, and looking at it from an employer's side, there's genuine concern for employers, and especially concerns that should be taken very seriously. Especially smaller businesses, these non-compete clauses have definitely served a commercial purpose.
And the issue here is that we're trying to protect legitimate business interest. So this is more important for those small and medium enterprises where their pricing information, their trade secrets, their general strategic know-how is really valuable to them. So when you have an employee walk out that door, they depart taking all of that with them.
Yeah, and it's unlike large corporations which have things like patents and proprietary technology. SMEs often have very little else protecting it, and there's a genuine fear that with employees that have served over a decade with an employer, they can be leaving the job on a Friday and then be taking your clients on a Monday.
Exactly, and something else to be concerned about or is worth calling out is what we all know as poaching, where a competitor will come in and they will take and they will target your best employees, because oftentimes they're well aware that that employee is coming to them with the knowledge, but also that client list. And we see this happen a lot across the legal industry, accounting, and financial services, because if you look at those industries, what they have in common is that they're really dependent on those relationships.
Yeah, and there's a common misconception here that the contract is a foolproof way of protection, but the law around non-competes has always been nuanced.
And that's true, because what courts can do is that they can strike out a non-compete clause, and they have the power to strike out, but what they don't have the power to do is rewrite a clause. So when drafting these types of clauses, you want to put in what we call a cascading clause. And what this does is it starts at the highest restraint and it cascades down, giving options to the lowest level of the restraint. An example of that may be, okay, well, we start with a 2-year restraint, then that's option A. B will be for a single year, and C could be for 3 months. So if that goes before the court, and the court applies what we call a reasonable test, because they will have to see, well, is it there to protect a legitimate interest, or does it extend beyond that? And if it does, it'll strike out that clause. So in this instance, it may strike out that 2-year provision, but what's remaining is that single year, and they can land on that as the option to take. If that cascading clause wasn't in place, then the restraint clause altogether would be would see a strike through it,
Yeah.
and it wouldn't be applicable.
And without that structure, I mean, you could be left with a singular restraint, which can be struck out by a court, and then you're left with essentially nothing.
Exactly.
Okay, so obviously an example there is that a hairdresser might have a 2-year national restraint, which is certainly almost unenforceable, but a senior partner with a 6-month local market restraint is a different proposition. So I guess what we should be asking is what the employer should be doing. I know that 2027 feels like far away, but it's important to act now.
Definitely. I think employers should be taking an approach where they're salary mapping. So they need to identify, okay, what contracts fall within that $183,000 threshold and which fall out. Now it's important, as you mentioned, that threshold changes every July. So this isn't something that can only be done once. They need to make sure that this becomes part of their annual review cycle so that they know which contracts to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I guess there's the option of structuring your compensation to keep the employee above that high income threshold. If you have an employee you feel is holding on to sensitive client information, you can adjust their salary to make sure that that non-compete still stays as a tool. However, it needs to make commercial sense independently, and you can't be just using it.
Yeah, 100%. And another strategy is, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't have 1 or 2 employees holding, the most valuable client relationships and all the client accounts. It's important that employers focus on distributing these amongst employees to kind of mitigate that risk as well.
Yeah, and I guess on the penalty side, it's not a regime you want to test the limits of.
No, definitely not. So you can be subject to penalties under the Corporations and Competition Act, and those we can see are in the millions of dollars. And there's also a New South Wales provision under the Restraint of Trade Act, which will operate more closely. And all of these have penalties.
Yes, if you're an employer with restraint of trade clauses, you need to understand your position now, not because 2027 is imminent, but it's important to be proactive so it saves yourself in the long run.
100%. And we know the employment landscape is always changing, it's evolving, we're seeing shifts, and it's really important to just stay across everything.